This video is the building of a shed. Okay, well, not just any shed. It's more of a relatively affordable stealth mode, solar powered, no life, block out the world, anti-girlfriend, introvert paradise gaming cave. So I'm going to take you through my solar-powered gaming shed build and walk you through everything I bought for the whole project, and how much everything cost, the trials and tribulations I experienced, and talk about what were the most difficult parts, and at the end, I'll give you a general rundown of everything I learned and things you must know if you want to try something like this. So first and foremost, I actually built this shed about a year ago, so let's go back and talk about the most difficult part of building any shed, which is the foundation. One thing you need to know before building a shed is that it has to sit on a solid foundation. I know I sound like a total dad, and it's been said over and over again, especially in the Bible, but whether it's a house or a shed or any other structure, the foundation is critical. If you don't build your shed on a solid flat surface that will last for years, your shed will warp, meaning your doors won't close, cracks will appear, and this applies to both wood and plastic sheds. The steps for building the foundation were pretty straightforward, but it required a ton of manual labor. So the first step was digging a hole. Because the shed I wanted to buy was an 11 by 7, I dug a 12 by 8 foot hole about 10 inches deep, which doesn't sound like much, but that is about 5,000 pounds of dirt that needed to be moved from the ground. And the next step was framing the foundation. So I framed a rectangle in the hole to support the outer walls and make sure that it wouldn't cave in. And this frame also helps support all the gravel and sand and the pavers that are going into the foundation. And the next step was the moisture barrier. And don't skip this part, this is absolutely critical. If you don't install a moisture barrier, that moisture can travel right up into your shed and affect all your expensive electronics in there. After the moisture barrier, gravel was added to the tune of about 2,000 pounds, followed by a top layer of leveling sand. After screeding the leveling sand, I'd laid down 2 by 2 foot concrete pavers to create as flat a surface as possible. And the last step was the easiest and most satisfying part, using some joint sand or polymeric sand for the big brains, which locks the pavers into place. Although this method is less permanent than concrete, trust me, this foundation will last for years. Next step was actually buying the shed. For my budget, I wanted something that was really good quality, affordable, and most importantly, something that would fly under my HOA's radar. That's when everything started pointing to the Keter artisan sheds. And I chose this model because I really liked how the roof isn't pointed up so people wouldn't be able to see it from the outside of my backyard, like over the fence. And I ended up buying their 11 foot by 7 foot model, and I got it for a really good deal at the time, which was about $1,600 delivered. Now, like I said earlier, the hardest part was definitely the foundation, but to my relief, building the shed itself was a lot easier than I thought it would be. I actually was able to do this by myself, and it only took me about 6 or 7 hours. But let's fast forward to a year later when I decided to actually commit to making this thing a serious gaming shed and making this video. So the shed was already built, and I already had some stuff inside of it when I decided to start the project, but to my dismay, after removing all the junk out of it, I found it was pretty dirty and it smelled of mold thanks to the foam flooring that I initially put in there. So of course, the first step was trashing that foam flooring and cleaning it out. Well, scratch that. The first step was evicting the former tenants who were squatting inside for a while. After sucking up all the dust, I mopped the floors. Then I laid down the first purchase I made for my shed, which was a nice rug by Gorilla Grip. And let me tell you, this surprised the heck out of me. It's super soft, it's affordable, it really grips to the ground, which is super important, and I'm really happy with it. And trust me, this is way better than the original foam mats I had installed, which ended up warping and tearing and then getting that mildew smell. So foam mats just aren't durable enough, so lesson learned. Next up was the solar power. I used a Bluetti or Bluetti, however you pronounce it, 2,000 watt hour ultra zombie apocalypse never run out of power survival battery, and paired it with 2 JJN brand bifacial, which just means double-sided 400 watt solar panels. Now these are super cool because they take in solar panel on both sides of the panels, but I haven't really had time to set up proper mounts for them yet, so I only get power from one side of them right now. So with that setup and my gear that I plan to use, I should theoretically get somewhere around 7 to 8 hours of playtime before the battery runs out. And the last step for the solar was just some connector cables, which I drilled a hole in the back of the shed and passed through a grommet and then connected to the battery. Now I have a confession. Although I have dubbed this a solar powered gaming shed, I cheated. I ended up running an extension cable from the 120 volt outlet from my house underground through a PVC conduit and into the shed, as there are some things I'm gonna need running 24/7. And also just in case I ever need to charge the battery for days that may not have as much sun. So I hooked up a couple things to the 120 volt house line that need to be constant, like I have a dehumidifier, which I'll talk about later, and my Amazon Alexa that lets me control the exhaust fans and toggle the charger and turn the lights on and off and other small stuff. And I can do this remotely when I'm away from the house. Now, one thing you have to consider when building any shed, especially a resin one, these sheds are not insulated. That means they get extremely hot during the day. And by hot, I mean these things turn into literal ovens in the summertime. So to help deal with that, I installed an exhaust fan by a company called Vevor. And let me tell you, this thing is a little monster. Besides being super powerful, it can be set to activate at specific temperatures or humidity levels and has a bunch of other adjustable speed settings and an LCD control panel, which is really nice. So of course, what is a gaming setup without without the perfect desk. Well, the good thing was I already had the gaming desk I wanted to use. It's just the super played out Ikea Alex drawer set and butcher block tabletop that every tech YouTuber has had since 2015. The problem was the tabletop was 8 feet long, and that would just take up too much room in a small shed like this. So I just cut the desk so it would fit perfectly in the corner of the shed. But another problem was that I've been using this desk pretty heavily since I bought it during COVID, so it had a lot of wear and tear. And for that reason, I decided to sand it down and get rid of all those scratches and gashes and completely refinish it. Now I have to admit, I cut some corners here. I used an all-in-one stain sealant, which turned out okay, but I usually only use and recommend one stain sealant on wood called Rubio Monocoat. Rubio Monocoat is God mode. This is the most resilient coating I've ever used. However, it's pretty expensive and it's hard to apply, and I just didn't have the patience for it. I wanted to get the job done. But all in all, the stuff that I used turned out pretty good, except it turned out a little too dark, but that's okay. As a last minute decision, I thought it would be cool to also put the tabletop on an adjustable height standing desk, so I bought one from a company called Top Ski or Top Sky, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of these adjustable height standing desks out there, but I like this one because it's pretty much universal. It can fit desks ranging from 5 to 8 feet, and it has 3 programmable height settings. So once the desktop was dry, I attached it to the standing desk base, and surprisingly, it fit perfectly in the corner of the shed. After the desk was installed, I hauled all my current gaming gear from inside my house and in my gaming room and into the shed. But in the excited spending frenzy I was already in, I added a few things. In case you haven't noticed about my channel, I am all about handheld PC gaming right now, so I paid a visit to the old credit card fairy and dropped some good old American debt on the OnexGPU2, which is an external GPU handheld gaming dock. So the idea here was to just be able to come out to the backyard with my Claw 8, plug it in, and instantly start gaming. And a quick note, watch out for an upcoming video on the OnexGPU, as I encountered some pretty shady business practices from that company, so stay tuned for more of that. And on to the centerpiece of my gaming setup, which is my Secret Labs Titan Evo Witcher Edition chair. Now this thing is my pride and joy, but it's also so heavy it's difficult to push around, so I also picked up a tempered glass chair mat to make it easier to push around inside the shed. Next up, I found the smallest little whittle sofa recliner couch I could find on Amazon, and this thing is pretty cool because you can pull the bottom section out and turn this thing into a bed. So on those long nights of gaming into the midnight hours, if I get too tired, I can just pull out the bottom and sleep in the shed, and it works pretty well. Okay, and for the end product, I am not the best interior designer or decorator, so please give me a break here, but after about a full day of installing lights and tucking in cables and downloading and installing software, here's the final product, my solar-powered gaming shed. And for the ultimate question, will I be able to adventure quietly and undetected into the late hours of the night? Or will the evil HOA detect my quest and strike me with a wound so deep that the very foundations of my kingdom will shatter beneath me, leaving me only with the smoldering ashes of the dreams I once dared to build? Or more realistically, a strongly worded letter that says it's against the rules to have a lighted shed that's visible over the fence line. It's against HOA policy, I checked. Well, there's only one way to find out. And the lighting check is a pass. You can barely see any lights leaking out, but then when you open the door, it's a party inside. Okay, let's talk about my experience with this setup so far, like what's it really like to use. So all in all, I've got to say, gaming in this thing has been an absolute dream. One of my favorite things to do now is to just hang out in the shed when it's raining with both of the doors open and just playing a mellow game on my handheld. This is a great stress reliever. And as for my thoughts on the Keter Artisan shed itself, this shed is probably one of the best resin sheds you can get for gaming purposes. I mean, I've had it for a year, but this thing has been through everything. It's been through rain, thunderstorms, high winds, and even wildfire smoke, and everything inside has stayed safe and dry. I mean, this thing is so sturdy, there's even videos online of people doing pull-ups on the Keter shed frames. And I also really like the design. I like that it doesn't look like a typical backyard shed filled with garden tools or other miscellaneous junk. It looks like a cool little studio space, and honestly, I think it fits the vibe of a gaming setup pretty well. And then there's the price. I mean, for under $1,600, I get a gaming space and it frees up a room in my house. Now let's talk about what it's actually like to use the solar power. On a fully charged battery powering all my gear, I get between between 6 to 7 hours of game time, which is a bit less than expected, but that's more than enough for me on most nights. On sunny days with the solar panels facing the right direction, the battery can go from 0 to a full charge no problem. That means for the most part, on a typical sunny day, I get an entire night of gaming without it showing up on my electric bill, which is pretty nice. However, on overcast days, I only get about half that, and that's when sometimes I will have to flip on the battery charger. But it's still not perfect. I'm just starting out. I do have some future plans for the shed. I'm planning on getting better solar panel mounts so I can position them for better sun exposure and get more efficient charging. I'm also going to put in a backdrop so I can utilize the double face, whatever it's called, on the solar panels and get a little bit more charging. Also, at some point, I'd like to run an Ethernet line out from the house because the Wi-Fi is a bit weak, but that's it for now. Now, are you thinking about building your own gaming shed? Well, not so fast. There are a few things I learned along the way, some expected and some definitely not. First off, let's start with the complete cost. The shed itself was a great deal. It was about $1,600, but the foundation cost me around $600 additional dollars. This was for the moisture barrier, the wood, the gravel, the paving sand, the leveling sand, and the pavers. And trust me, this isn't my first shed build. I've actually built a few of these, and I'll say this clearly. If you take anything from this video, the foundation is the most important part of any shed. You can't just go out in your backyard, rig up some leaves, and start putting a shed together. If you don't have a solid level base, eventually the walls will warp, the doors won't close properly, and it'll turn into a complete nightmare, and you may end up having to tear it all down and rebuild it on a new foundation. Okay, another thing to consider is the weather. If you live in a hot climate where it's pretty sunny, you probably shouldn't try this. These sheds have no insulation, as I said, and there's really no good way to insulate them either. In my first attempt at the gaming shed, I spent almost $300 in insulation material. It only lowered the inside temperature by a few degrees, and honestly, it wasn't even noticeable. What it did do, though, was increase the amount of moisture and humidity inside, which smelled like duck butt, so eventually I just stripped it all out. And this issue isn't exclusive to plastic sheds either. It also applies to regular wooden sheds. But that being said, some wooden sheds can be outfitted with drywall and insulation, which would basically make it like a house. In that case, you'd have much better insulation, and you'd probably be able to keep both heat and cold out. For my shed and where I live, I can game in it on sunny days, but I have to keep both doors wide open and run the exhaust fan on full blast. And even then, it still gets really hot in here. On days when the temperature goes above like 85 degrees, I can't game in the shed. It's way too hot. For example, there's been days when it gets to about 110 degrees inside the shed. And on the flip side, winter is the opposite. So where I live, it can get down in the low 30s as well. But I've been out here gaming in those conditions, and luckily with a small space heater and a sweater on, I found it's just perfectly fine inside the shed. Now, another important consideration, let's talk about moisture. So even though the shed does a pretty solid job, remember, it's still a shed. It's not like a room inside your house. Moisture and humidity can and will get in a shed, and that's a bad situation when you mix in expensive electronics. That's why I highly recommend using a dehumidifier. Besides the Alexa, it's basically the only thing in here running off the house power line. But just to give you an idea of the moisture problem in here, the dehumidifier reservoir is usually full after about a week. But with a dehumidifier and making sure there's no leaks when it rains, I can attest all your electronics will be perfectly fine inside here. Lastly, let's talk about security. This thing is made of resin, which is a fancy name for plastic. If someone really wants to break into it, they absolutely could. Now, I do have a lock on the door, but let's be honest, if someone even had moderate strength, they could just force open the door. That's why I got a security camera installed that comes with an audible alarm when it detects motion, and it also notifies me on my cell phone. And of course, luckily, I also have an extremely vicious attack dog I have on the premises. Trust me, bro, it's not worth losing your life over. But that's about it, guys. That's my dream solar-powered gaming shed. Let me know in the comments what you think, or if there's anything else I should add to the shed to make it even cooler. Other than that, you survived another one. See you next time.